get started because we have so much that we want to get to have conversation with you all about today. So I wanted, first of all, just to say welcome. My name is Kat Fribley, and I am the executive director at Birdability. And I am a fat, white, middle-aged, and multiply disabled queer femme with my purple hair in a big bun, and I'm wearing sparkly cat eye glasses and a black and white polka dot shirt with bright yellow earrings. Behind me, there's a red wall and a lot of plants. Uh, in order to create virtual access for as many folks as possible, we have ASL interpretation and captions for this event. To generate captions, you can go to the bottom of the screen and select the box that has CC in the toolbar and select show subtitles there. For us to build a community based in disability justice, we'll pause if there's any breakdown in accessibility through interpreters or captions. We'll also be using audio descriptions for any visuals that are shared, as you heard when I introduced myself. We welcome you to have your camera on, but due to the number of us participating, we ask that you remain muted unless you raise your hand using the Zoom feature and we call on you. We're going to use the chat to ask folks questions occasionally, and we ask that you be mindful to not use the chat extensively, which can create issues for those using screen readers. Your panelists and facilitators will do our best to share the flavor of the chat out loud. And we've also enabled the option for you to disable chat comments on your screen reader if you're using one. We encourage you also to let us know if there's something you need to make this session more accessible to you, and if there's something we can do overall to make Birdability more accessible to you. So I am so grateful that you all are here and part of this growing birdability community, working to introduce folks with access challenges and disabilities to birding and to make birding more accessible and inclusive. Birdability is a nonprofit, a national nonprofit for and by folks with disabilities that was founded by Virginia Rose in 2018. We became a nonprofit in 2021, and we've been working to share the joys of birding with people who have disabilities and access concerns ever since, because we really do believe that birding is for every single body. Birdability Week is a week-long celebration filled with virtual events designed to connect birders with all abilities, as well as an opportunity for us to share resources and ideas to help the birding community become more accessible, inclusive, and welcoming. It draws inspiration and builds on other inclusive celebrations such as Black Birders Week, Latino Conservation Week, and Let's Go Birding Together. We have a very birdie weekend planned. I don't know if y'all have heard about this, but we hope you'll join us for Birdability Your Way, which is an opportunity for everyone to bird in the way that fits for them. And we hope you might even download the bingo card and tell us a little bit about what your birding looks like and sounds like for you. We also have 2 social events this weekend, and we're going to be doing Instagram live birding from sites across the country, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday morning. We can't do this without your support. There are so many ways that folks have already invested in birdability with their time, with their energy, and with their money. And we're going to put a link in the chat so you can continue to do that if you would like. We're going to use a good old-fashioned donation link. There's also a PayPal link. And if you prefer a check, I still write checks. You can also find our address on the donation link and send us a check. We're happy for any way that you're able to support us. I want to thank a couple of folks. Well, I want to thank a lot of folks, actually. First and foremost, I want to thank our Birdability captains. They are volunteers who are the absolute heart of everything that we do. We've all worked together to create Birdability Week and to make it happen. And I can't thank each of them enough, including Marie Geiger, who is a Birdability captain on our panel today. I want to thank our sponsors, including our primary bald eagle sponsor, the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation, who have made so much possible this Birdability Week, including ASL access and virtual birding events. I want to also thank Pro Bono ASL for providing ASL interpreters for this event. And I want to tell you that our board is really fantastic. It's made up of some of the most delightful and engaged advocates for access, and I feel really lucky to get to work with them. And one of them is going to share a little bit right now about how you could become part of the leadership of this growing organization if you're interested in that.
Hi, Kat, and everyone. Thank you so much, Kat. I appreciate that intro. Before I let you all enjoy today's program, I am Maggie. I'm she, her pronouns, a white cisgender female in my 30s, wearing a dark jacket today, and my background is a virtual Zoom background featuring Birdability. And I'm a member of the Birdability Board of Directors, which, as Kat mentioned, is a really incredible and small team of people who've become some of my dearest friends. And we're looking to expand and enhance the team. Our board plays a very supportive, guiding role in the work that Birdability does, Birdability Week included. So if by the end of this program you're feeling energized and like you want to contribute to this work as well in a guiding way, our board is accepting applications through December 1st. Now, we will be posting some links in the chat so that you can access that application, as well as some of the qualifications that we're looking for. But I do want to add, if our mission resonates with you, please consider applying even if you don't meet all of those qualifications, because diverse perspectives and life experiences make us stronger, and that absolutely could include you. So have a thought, and hopefully we will hear from you. Back to you, Kat, and let's enjoy this program.
Yes, thank you. And now I would love to turn it over, Emily, if you are okay with this, to Emily Walensky from the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation, who's joining us today and who can just do a quick hello and welcome.
Hello and welcome. Again, I'm Emily Walensky. I am in front of a background with Birdability logos and the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation logo, which is the organization I'm representing today. We're a proud sponsor of this event. I am the director of outreach and education. Oh, let me finish my visual description. I'm Caucasian. I have my hair up in a bun. I'm wearing a white t-shirt with the Christopher and Dana Reeve logo that you can't really see. And yeah, then I'm in my 40s. So I've got a little bit of gray hair, sadly. So anyway, I am the director of outreach and education for the Reeve Foundation. We are just really thrilled about this. We really see that the benefit of Birdability and the work that this organization is doing for communities around the country and even the world probably. The Reeve Foundation has a grant, a federal grant from the Administration for Community Living, and that grant supports the National Paralysis Resource Center. And so the National Paralysis Resource Center provides grants to organizations around the country, nonprofits that are assisting and helping people live independently and live quality lives with all different forms of paralysis. So that's not just spinal cord injury, it's stroke, it's neuromuscular disabilities, it's multiple sclerosis, it's all kinds of, it encompasses a huge umbrella of service. And so we have a information line that people can call. It's a 1-800 number, and you can call right in and get support throughout the week, even into the evening. And we have materials in many languages, I think translated into over 20 languages. We have hundreds and hundreds of resources, and it's just amazing. We do a lot of great programming, and this is one of the things that we're supporting. And so thanks so much for inviting me. I hope everybody has a great time, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Emily. And I also just want to point out to folks that this is not the only opportunity for us to really talk about the benefits of birding, especially for folks who live with spinal cord injury or spinal cord disorders or paralysis, and that we actually have a terrific opportunity coming up December 11th with Hannah and Emily and others from the Reeve Foundation and from Birdability will be doing a webinar to talk more about the resources that are available to folks. So excited to have you back then, Emily, and to get to go deeper into community together and share more, because one of the things that we know is that there are so many studies that are proving exactly what many of us have known for a long time, which is that time in nature and time with birds is restorative. It is something that feeds mental health and wellness, and it's something that is, for the most part, able to be accessed by many of us in many different ways, right? Like birds are so many places and are so often available to us. So I just wanted to name that our conversation today is both about the joy of birding and access, but it is also about the fact that when we talk about access, we don't often think about invisible disabilities, and especially mental health. That is not often top of mind when we talk about access. Often what is top of mind are mobility kinds of considerations. And so for our conversation today, we really wanted to lift up and make known the ways in which birding is not only a benefit for those of us with mental health conditions, but also that we benefit from working towards universal access as well. I discovered birding when I was 18 years old and had just been diagnosed with PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, which later became a diagnosis of complex PTSD, or complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And birding is part of what saved my life in conjunction with other mental health modalities like therapy. And I'm so grateful to now get to do this work. And to be able to introduce you all to some of these amazing folks who are joining us, who are going to have this conversation today, because invisible does not mean less important. And it's really, I think, crucial that we have a conversation, and this conversation, about the ways that mental health and physical health go hand in hand, and the ways in which birding impacts and positively affects both of them. So with that, I want to say that we have panelists today who are authors, who are mental health practitioners, who are folks who have studied why and how nature affects our mental well-being, and have used this very practice themselves. And with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Holly Merker, and folks are going to introduce themselves as they, as we get started. But I want to turn it over to Holly, who's going to lead us through an experience, a practice. And thank you for being here, Holly.
Well, thank you, Kat. I really appreciate it. So hello, everyone. My name is Holly Merker. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a middle-aged white woman with shoulder-length brown hair. And today I'm wearing a bright blue shirt. Behind me is a bookshelf with lots of bird books and some prints on the wall that are of birds. My binoculars are on the desk behind me. So today, let's take some time to gently arrive into the present moment. Begin by getting yourself comfortable in a position that allows you to feel relaxed and alert, allowing yourself to switch from your usual mode of doing to non-doing, to simply being. If it's comfortable for you, take a deep breath in through the nose and release out through the mouth. Now imagine yourself as a hummingbird perched on a branch. Do you sit in the shade to blend in, or do you allow the sun to amplify your feathers like glitter? Allow yourself to take flight. Will you make a quick escape from where you are, or will you hover and watch the world around you as you flutter in place? Allow the wind to sail across your body, pushing away your stress. You have freedom. Your fast wings will carry your tiny body anywhere, escaping from the pressures of life. Where do you go? Allow yourself to drift above your world. Leave your stress and anxiety below. Allow new ideas and energy to fill you up while you are on the wing. The bird's eye view can bring new perspectives to our lives if we allow ourselves to momentarily detach and see things as the hummingbird. We all have wings. We just need to allow them to let us soar. Shifting your awareness back into the breath, taking a deep breath in through your nose if that feels right, and slowly exhaling through your mouth. And now come back into this Zoom space, recognizing that you were not alone in this practice, that you were held within our community, all of us brought together by the birds. Thank you, everyone, for letting me share.
Thank you, Holly. One of the things that I'm really excited about today is to spend the next chunk of our time together with Holly, Tammah, Sheridan, and Anne-Marie, talking about how each of us uses different practices and tools around birding and mental health. So let's get started with asking, I'm really curious about how each of you came to birding. How did you get involved? What drew you to it? And how has it influenced your personal journey? And Holly, since you got us started, I'm wondering if you would be willing to start us off, and then we can just sort of popcorn around. And as each of you speaks for the first time, if you would do your own introduction, that would be terrific.
Sure. So thank you for inviting me to share that, because it's an important part of my life, because I truly believe that birds help to save my life. And while I have been a bird lover throughout my life, as far back as I can remember, birds played an important role in my healing, both physically and mentally, during a really challenging chapter of my life, when I was confronted with a couple of things that were sort of like life crises. And they included my husband was in the military and was deployed to the Middle East shortly after 9/11. And I had two little boys that were 5 and 7 at the time. So that in itself was complicated. At that time, I was already an avid birder, somebody who would chase birds all around, somebody who sought after birds kind of as a busy mom to give me some respite and to clear my mind, right? Probably a lot of you can relate to this. But I found that birds became an incredible healing companion for me. When shortly after he left in his deployment, I suddenly had a sledding accident resulting in compression fractures to my spine. So I was in a brace from the neck down for many months. And this meant that I couldn't even lift things as like my binoculars, right? And so that changed my ability quickly in an instant. And I found that the way I started to connect with birds had to be different, because I wasn't allowed to drive very long distances, and also just because I was physically incapable at that time. So I found myself having to shift to yard birding primarily, or what I could see through my window. But shortly after that, I was diagnosed with an aggressive form of breast cancer. And that compounded everything. And for me, it kind of catapulted me into some incredible amounts of anxiety, stress, and anything, you can probably relate to all of the emotions and feelings we have when we go through something that's difficult in our lives. And so for me, at that time, I discovered mindfulness practice in a way through the birds. They brought me into the present moment, and this changed my birding style. And so this is a little bit about my journey. There's so many layers, but birds bring me hope and inspiration. And so that's a little bit about how I came into birding.
Thank you for sharing all of that, Holly. I think one of the things that resonates with me and probably with many of the others who are here is that there often isn't just one thing we're navigating in our lives, right? It's not uncommon for there to be multiple things that change how we are in our bodies and in our lives over time. Tammah or Sheridan or Anne Marie, would one of you like to go next?
Sure.
Yeah.
I can go next. So my name is Sheridan Alford. I use she, her pronouns. I guess I'm a young adult, 28, African-American woman. Currently, I have Black faux locks that are past my shoulders, and my background is a Zoom background with the Birds Georgia logo, my name, and then my title, which is Director of Community Engagement for the nonprofit Birds Georgia. And to answer your question, Kat, how I got into birding, I definitely was the outdoorsy child. So while all of my friends are outside playing together, I was probably over on a rock somewhere looking at some ants or something. That translated into me going to college at the University of Georgia and getting my wildlife science degree, my bachelor's in wildlife science. And that's where I discovered birds as a discipline, as a research object, as a mindfulness resource. And so when I was in school, as many people go through a lot of changes in their life at that around that age, 18, 19, 20, that's when I experienced my first, depression era, both physical and emotional anxiety. So many different emotions that I may have experienced at one point, but not to that severity. And at that time, I needed something to, I don't know what yet, but something to either focus my mind so that I could, focus on my studies or focus on my goals, or as an escape from the different emotions that I was feeling so that I could ground myself and then tap back into what I needed to do. So in my undergraduate studies is when I went on my first bird walk. So that was in 2018. I didn't even know that it was a thing that people did for fun. I said, this is so cool. We just go outside and we look at birds and then we go home. And so I had a great time. I continued to go on bird walks after the first one. And I did a little bit of bird research as well. So bird banding, which is a research tool that scientists use to track birds' migration. You can use it to track climate change, various different things. And from there, I also did my master's at the University of Georgia. And so I added parks, recreation, and tourism to my bag of degrees because I wanted to add a human component. I knew about the animals, but I wanted to learn how that impacted people and how I could find my place in helping the impact that birds have on people. And now I work at Birds Georgia. So that is my story.
Thank you so much for that. And Sheridan, again, I love hearing each person talk because there's so much that I think all of us can connect with, that like ability to have our minds go quiet in a different way. Tammah or Anne Marie, would one of you like to share?
Sorry, I couldn't find the unmute button. Can you hear me now?
We sure can.
Okay. Yes, my name is Marie Geiger. I am a crazy birder. I'm also a birdability captain in Pennsylvania, suburb of Philadelphia on the East Coast. So, and I've been interested in birds pretty much my whole life. I was born with a very rare bone condition that involved brittle bones. So I had a lot of fractures as a kid. Could be 2, 3 a year. It could be whatever. So understandably, it meant I was often sidelined at home while friends and family were out running around the world. So my parents got me a bird feeder, and that's all their fault from there on. It started, woke me up to a passion that would influence my happiness for the rest of my life, and it still does. So even when I was stuck in, I wasn't feeling sorry for myself or thinking about what I was missing. I was looking at the beauty right in front of me. So, and that, like I said, ignited a passion, and I eventually did get bachelor's in biology and went on to photography. I find it a challenge to create unique photographs of birds and nature that, people can really see how beautiful the world can be. It's often a confusing world, as we all know. And in addition to my physical disability, which requires me to use a wheelchair, I also suffer from depression on and off, and those of us that have such depression know that can actually be more restricting in your life than, being in a wheelchair. So, I can understand this from both the physical and the mental aspects of how birdability has affected my life.
Thank you, Anne Marie, for that. Tammah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tammah Watts. My pronouns are the she series, she, her, hers. I guess I'm an older, I'm a senior citizen. African-American, female. I have long braids that are black and white, intermixed. I'm wearing glasses that are clear with a bit of a brown on the frame. My background is a bookshelf with lots of books about birds and birding according to color of the rainbow, as well as statues, various figurines of birds of different colors, black, glass, green, and brass, figures of different types of birds. Yeah. And how I got into birds, I am a disabled birder. I am amongst us who have invisible, I think this would be considered invisible disabilities, with exceptions on days where my gait or otherwise might suggest otherwise. And I noticed birds and enjoyed birds when I was younger, and because of a life exposed to chickens and ducks at a very early age. And I always say that they are birds, and I really feel as though that really cemented a connection in noticing birds in the wild beyond this little city farm, that kind of like a setting that my mother offered me and my brother growing up for a little bit. And then I went dormant in terms of actively connecting with birds until about 2007. I became injured going for a surgical procedure, and now have what's called chronic regional pain syndrome. The acronym is CRPS. It's a very debilitating neuromuscular condition that is lifelong. And I became very immobilized. And as a result of that immobilization, I became what would be called, I call it being couch bound. I went through multiple trials of various medications for pain management that even created more debilitating conditions for me. And my world became very dark. I became very depressed. And I really was going through a lot of grief and loss about the loss of a life that I once lived, where I was very active. I could go here and there. I was working way too much, over 80 hours a week in social services, family services, and mental health clinic. And that's something that I had done for many, many decades. And that defined, unbeknownst to me, but through this process of feeling very isolated and alone, that had defined me so much so that that loss created a huge gap. And that's where the depression came, and the sense of shame at not being, quote, well, and anxiety about what was the prospect for my future, in all aspects and areas. And it wasn't until one day I was at the kitchen window and I looked out of the window and noticed a little yellow bird, which I didn't even know that was a male yellow warbler. It was spring, up in a tree. But I noticed it moving, and my curiosity was piqued, and I kept noticing it, and it would return over a course of several days. And that began to draw me out and to connect with that bird. And through that little yellow bird, I then began to notice the other birds in the yard. And so I often will say, the yard didn't change. Everything about it had remained the same, but it went from lacking color, if you will, from a gray tone to it, to being very bright, vibrant, and alive, because I began to notice the doves, the forever house finches that live up to their name, right? The hummingbirds, and the unusuals, that I began to notice the patterns amongst the fellow residents in the yard, as well as those passing through. And that is how I began to connect with birds in the way that I could. On some days, that meant, as you've heard from others, looking through a window or the doorway. I happen to have a kitchen door that has glass in it, so that does afford me that opportunity to see in different ways. And then other times I began to gradually sit out. I was able to move and sit for a minute at a time, and then increase that time to 5 and 10 minutes, and then build my ability to spend time outdoors. And in that way, I began to feel a reduction in the depression. I felt less isolated. And I know we'll talk maybe more about that piece of it, but that is where I began to notice the connection between spending time with the birds and my mental health aspects and my healing journey.
While you're still unmuted, Tammah, I'm wondering, to roll us into the next sort of piece of this, when we were talking, one of the things that we talked about was how our experience as a birder with a disability has really shaped our understanding of the mental health benefits of birding, and what kinds of unique challenges or opportunities that has presented. And I know for myself, similar to many of the stories that we've already heard, while I was born with invisible disabilities, acquired disability due to trauma, then in 2007, a similar year, Tammah, I actually fell down the stairs and acquired a mobility disability as well. And suddenly my life was very different, because what had grounded me and kept me connected to nature was, at that time, my practice of getting up and walking out the door and into the woods, pushing a stroller right down the sidewalk to our little sit spot at the local park. And suddenly I didn't have access to that in the same way. And it became a really painful thing to me to feel like I had lost this ability. And I really was mourning that. I appreciated whoever was talking about that mourning that we have to do. And so I know for myself that this was such a huge shift then in how I thought about birding, because before I birded and it made my mind go quiet, but I hadn't really thought of it as a mental health tool, even, at all, really consciously. But when I lost it, I suddenly really knew what a mental health tool it had been, and I had to figure out how to bird differently. So I'm curious, Tammah and Anne Marie and anyone else who has had this experience of that intersectionality of being a disabled birder who then uses this for mental health. I'm curious for you how that changed your understanding.
Yes, and I appreciate the question. I think some of this, like, I appreciate us meeting like in this space and able to talk about this now, because at the time it wasn't so much a discussion that we could have. So we're having, I mean, just from us sharing our stories, it illustrates that back in the day, right, so to speak, we each were in our own little worlds of connecting and journeying and going through. So all that to say, we're looking back in time. For me, I'll speak for myself. At one point I had to really take a look and assess, like, what's different? Why is my pain feeling less? Why do I feel less isolated, even though I'm still not spending a lot of time with others necessarily? Do you know what I mean? And why do I feel more grateful? And why do I feel like I'm not mourning as much? You know, the grief does not feel so pronounced. And in that process, I feel that, like, the intersectionality you speak of, because we are dealing with, and I say the word dealing intentionally, because at times it is that we're dealing with our different disabilities. We're dealing with the medical, the healthcare systems that are not always understanding. And, you know, we have to shore ourselves up to go on that appointment, to have that yet another conversation about what you're really experiencing. All of that can bring you to a point of self-acceptance. And I think that the birds symbolize that they make themselves present in the ways that they can show up, which is very different for every bird, shows up in a different way. And there's a sense of acceptance for me. I dare to posit, to offer that for all of us, to symbolize that we can show up as we are too. And so that really then underlies the essence that we are good enough as we are right now, today, with all of how we are. And that is the self-acceptance. And it is through self-acceptance that we can feel at peace with ourselves, so that we can go on with our journeys. And it's been shown that that helps support improving our well-being, as I guess we can say in that way.
100%. I love that so much. And that piece around birding, bringing so many different pieces, right, of this puzzle together. And part of that you've named is that recognition of our own perfection as a piece of this larger ecosystem, this larger world. Part of that is about the ability to be present and mindful and focused on the birds. Part of that is about the community. When you were just talking about, like, we didn't have those spaces, right, in 2007, where we were talking about this and naming it. I have felt so joyful to be a part of this community, and to be able to talk more about this. And sometimes, honestly, it's a reprieve from thinking about our own day-to-day pain. I know, as someone that lives with chronic pain, like, for me, that is also a huge piece of it, is when I'm able to have that focus, other things recede, right? Anne Marie, I know you had shared such a beautiful reflection when we last year during Birdability Week asked folks to think about and tell us about their mindful birding, mental health, and disability sort of intersections. And I'm wondering if you would be willing to talk a little bit about how this has shown up for you.
Yeah, like I said, I have physical disability that causes physical pain, but along with that comes emotional and things like anxiety and depression and all that. And birding has a way of, it doesn't get rid of that completely, but it kind of overpowers. It brings you into the moment. How can you be thinking about the past or the future when a cardinal lands in front of you. I mean, it just is there, and it's there, and it's now. It grounds you. So by getting me grounded, it helps take away some of the physical and the mental pain for other things. I find I'm looking at what I did write. Birds just have such soft feathers, textures, patterns, and colors. It tells us there's great beauty in today's world, even though at the moment I might not be thinking things are really great. I mean, you just turn on the news, you just, feel your body and you realize, things are not that great. But then when you're outside feeling the sun on your face and the wind in your hair and the birds in front of you coming and going, and they also represent freedom. Physical and mental disabilities can restrict me. But then I see birds and it's like, I feel like they are not restricted at all. They go wherever they want, whenever they want, pretty much. So it's like the ultimate of freedom that everybody really kind of wants in their life. So I think birding has really changed me for the better a lot. By grounding me and bringing me into the present, and it woke me to a passion. I really had no idea before that point. And I was like a young teenager when I started, and I just went from there. Went to college and biology and all that stuff, and now do photography on the side. So it just kind of awoke me to so many things that I don't know where I'd be if I hadn't gotten involved. So
I love that. And I love, Anne-Marie, that you and Sheridan share this thing in common where you were introduced to it, and then suddenly that became your college career. It became the thing you studied. It becomes for many of us. Yeah, right. It becomes so much more than just the thing that is a pastime. It becomes a core part of who we are.
Exactly. I mean, and I was started young, and I remember a woman drove me to and from school when I was really young, and apparently, I guess I drove her nuts because one day she said, "When did you start getting into crows, and why are they so exciting?" And I realized the things I'm thinking about are not what everybody else is thinking about, but it's occupying me and keeping me grounded and waking me up to the beauty of nature. So
yes,
yeah.
And that then really does, I love your that thought of not everybody is thinking about this in the same way I am. And that one of the things that I love about also, this conversation and about birding overall is it does allow us to find each other, to connect in a very different way with our communities. And, one of the things I'm wondering about is for many of us, we all have sort of touched on how this felt like coming home to some degree, or it felt like finding each other, finding community felt like this really important piece of our birding and our mental health. And I'm curious how all of this fits in to an intersectional approach to advocacy and to birding. And I'm thinking really specifically about folks hold so many different identities that impact their experience of birding. And when we are thinking about how we create spaces for people to bring their whole authentic selves to it, I've been so overjoyed to see things like Indigenous birding clubs and the Feminist Bird Club and BIPOC bird clubs and Latino Conservation Week, and really just see this proliferation of places where we feel able to bring our full selves. And I'm curious how you all have seen that play out in your own lives.
For sure. I could input on that.
Yeah.
I think most directly for intersectionality, I think back to, of course, the start of Black Birders Week, which the first one was in 2020. And my friends and I, came up with an idea based on an event that happened in New York with the now not well-known birder, Christian Cooper. But it really sparked connectivity between all of these different people around the country and around the globe at a certain point who shared a similar experience, but also figured out that we also had a shared love of birds. I think a fun fact that I always tell people is birds is the only animal that is found on all continents around the world. So anywhere you go, doesn't matter what country you're in, you could be in Antarctica, you can see a bird. And I think that that global scope really does tie people together. But even on a local scale, you're going out, even if I'm by myself and I have binoculars, or I'm sitting on a park bench, just looking up, someone's probably going to ask, "What are you doing?" at some point. And like Anne Marie said, you realize not only are not other people not thinking about this, but they're curious. They're curious, and then that gives an opportunity to share, to share your passion. I always think people can see authenticity. People can feel authenticity. They can hear it in your voice. They can pick up on it. And so even if they don't have a general interest in birds, just interacting with someone who does, it really does come across like, oh, maybe I should pay more attention to the robins in my backyard or the cardinals on the way to work, or what have you. And so, yes, I think it does definitely create spaces for people to connect. I'm appreciative that I started birding when I did, and in this, era, in this generation, what have you. Historically, it was an affluent white male activity. And now we have this lovely panel, and it looks nothing like that. So I'm appreciative that we've all been able to connect through birds, and that birds provide such a level of accessibility to so many different people, that you can truly share it with anyone. Really, you can find a way to kind of tap into birds, by sight, sound, feel, whatever.
Absolutely. All of that. And I love something that just arose, which is going to lead us into some of our next conversations, which is that piece around people are curious. And it provides an entry point often when we introduce people to the concept of birding, or to being really observant about birds, using whatever senses they have available to them. And I'm wondering, to all of our panelists, how does birding facilitate a deeper connection to nature, do you think? And why do you think that's particularly healing or beneficial? Anybody want to start us off? Holly, maybe you could start us off. We haven't heard from you for a minute.
Sure thing. Well, this is one of the things that I love about birds. And I'll echo some of the other comments, and one that Sheridan just made about birds being in every human habitat. And so I see them as equitable, because it doesn't matter where you are on planet Earth, there are birds around that you can connect with. And I truly believe that birds allow us a connection not only to them, because I feel it's a reciprocal connection when we are paying attention to birds. That is important. That is positive, right? And they bring us joy in return. And so I think it was Mary Oliver said that the first part of devotion is paying attention, right? And that is truly something that resonates with birds. But birds connect us to distant people, to distant landscapes through their migratory journeys. They allow us to have sort of an anchor into the world surrounding us, no matter where we are, and to feel connected. And especially during these difficult times when we are going through mixed emotions, or perhaps going through some difficult experiences, or even positive experiences in our lives. You know, they allow us that outlet. They allow us this sense that the world is still going on around us, despite what's going on in our busy human lives. And I think there's something really valuable in that and what they allow for us. And there's so many benefits to that. And the studies do show that having a more immersive experience in the natural world is sort of bolstering a lot of the research that we can look towards and some of the indigenous knowledge that we can tap into, that wisdom that tells us that nature indeed is therapeutic, is healing, and can offer us this opportunity to clear our minds, be in the present moment. And I think that's what's really special to them. So thank you.
Absolutely. It's such a core piece that, as you're talking about it, it both connects us to the world and also allows us a remove from the parts of the world that are oftentimes harmful or painful. And that makes me think about, so much of the sort of resilience or coping that comes right through birds for many of us. And I'm curious if there's anybody who wants to share anything about how that resilience and coping has shown up in your own lives.
Yeah, I can jump in. I did want to say to Holly's point as well, that it's always fun, the connectivity to nature that birds can give, because I feel as though they're like a gateway recreation. So if I can get you to notice the birds, then I can probably lead you into caring about the plants. And then I can start to weave in the water at some point. So, they're a really low barrier entry point to nature for sure. But to your second point of resilience and coping, I think that's just one of the gorgeous things about birds. They will find where they need to be and find a way to sustain. I'm based near Atlanta, Georgia, and Atlanta has some really great parts, but we also have some not so great parts. But even in the areas where it may seem the least likely to see a great blue heron or, migrating smaller birds like warblers, there are just little pockets. You can find a waterway. I always say it's not a Georgia bird walk if you do not see a great blue heron, because they are everywhere. So yeah, it really does signify, I think, that resilience and that coping, and they being birds figure it out. And I appreciate them for figuring it out, because that allows us to, take a step back, take a deep breath, and realize that we will also make it through.
Absolutely love that. Like, I love also when you're talking about, like I always say, it's not a bird walk unless we've seen a great blue heron. Like, it makes me also, though, be really aware of how much birds for me help me stay attuned to the cycles of nature and to the cycles of life. I'm just realizing here, he's doing something really nutty. Sorry, you all. That there is this ability that birds have to tell me, like, oh, the dark-eyed juncos are here. That means it's
getting cold outside.
It's time for hibernation. It's time for slowing and a different approach to my life in this moment. And the birds are the thing that remind me sometimes, right, of those things. And I think that noticing has been one of the things that has been such a thread through all of this, you all, that noticing is so huge, because the birds are there. The birds are there. They're different birds. And we also can be aware of the ways that birds teach us about inequity and inequality, and the way that birds show us the larger systems of oppression that exist in the world, right? And they're still there. Like, birds are there everywhere. And how we notice them and whether we notice them becomes a tool. Can y'all talk about those, like just that level of presence and mindfulness that birds invite from us? Tammah, yeah. Oh, and Marie, I saw you unmuting, and Tammah. We'll go to
Yeah,
Tammah.
just they were everywhere, and it's amazing. When you don't realize what is really right around you. For example, I was once in Manhattan, in huge metropolis doctors or hospital, and overwhelmed with one test after another. And I was in the waiting room, and I was like, just tired and cranky. And I looked out the window, and there were two pigeons on the window ledge. And the one was doing this exotic dance around the other one. And eventually they actually made it. I thought, well, I could watch sex in Manhattan at least, But it made me realize that the world is still going on, and no matter what I might be going through physically or mentally, just look, open my eyes and look.
Thank you for that. I have to say there's been an interesting thread through all of our Birdability Week events so far of the intimate views sometimes that we get of other creatures that are surprising to us if we are willing and able to pay attention to it. Tammah, yeah.
I like that, Marie. Yeah. I guess what comes up for me about this with the birds is they show up when we most need them. And in that process, they can remind us that in terms about talking about that connection and the coping and the resilience, that as they can show up, so can we. I know I keep bringing that up again, but I think when we have disabilities, it often can be working through that process. And so when a little like hummingbird shows up, like from the meditation or whatever bird that is, it can really remind us of our own ability to be present and to just appreciate the little things, if it's the little hummingbird, or the big things, if it's maybe a hawk or an eagle that suddenly shows up in the sky above that we take notice of. And I just want to mention the mindfulness is being in that moment of noticing, but it doesn't mean that you have to work at it. And I just like to really offer that too, because sometimes it can feel, I've spoken to people that sometimes feel like, well, this sounds so complicated about being mindful with birds that it sounds like I have to learn a whole lot to even do it. So that can take away from the joy of being with the birds. And so just to invite that, it's just allowing yourself, like we said, to slow down. You can be mindful and not necessarily slow down. It's just notice as you can. And in that way, you are connecting. You are connecting with the birds. You are connecting with all that's around you at that time. So that's my take on that.
I love that reminder. That doesn't have to be hard. Like you don't have to work at it. Yeah, Holly.
Yeah, I love what everybody is sharing about this, because even if we hear it a million times, it just feels good. It like brings a happy thought, and noticing how it makes us feel when we think about birds in this perspective. But I also feel like this is an important part of our own self-care, and that the gift that birds give us when they can allow us to be in the present moment, and we're not worrying about something that happened yesterday that's upsetting, and we're not thinking about, oh, what I need to do tomorrow, and focusing on our busy to-do list. Instead, we're in the right here, right now, and birds become that anchor in mindfulness practice, which is so helpful. So just advocating for putting a little bit of mindful birding into your everyday self-care practices, and allowing yourself, because truly we get so busy, we don't think about taking time out sometimes for our own self-care. And we think we need to be doing other things, which might show more productivity, but actually this is productivity. We need to redefine productivity and think about how restorative, as you mentioned, Kat, birds and birding can be for us. So just a little reminder, take care of yourself that way.
Yeah, Sheridan.
Yes, I just had to chuckle because my therapist has been telling me for the past 2 months about learning how to rest. And I was going to type it, but I guess I can say it here as well. To Tammah's point, it is a passive activity, which is an oxymoron. But the great thing about bird watching is it can be a passive activity or an active activity, depending on whichever you need at the time. But yes, definitely sometimes I do it for a job, so it can be very active, quote unquote, at times. But sometimes I have to remember to do it passively as well. It is a form of rest. It's supposed to be fun. So
Absolutely, Tammah.
And just to add one more idea to this part of this conversation about the self-care and the time, I like to say, gift yourself time with the birds. That could be a minute, 2 minutes, half an hour, or more. But those little pockets that we're talking about of self-care, the rest, isn't that a gift? And isn't it wonderful that the birds are around us in some way, shape, or form within X number of minutes to be a part of that? And like, as Holly was mentioning, they're the anchor. So we're not taking anything from ourselves. I know I say all the time too, like, take time. But I purposely want to invite folks to put that into your self-care toolkit. It's a gift to give to ourselves a minute or two to pause, to notice, to listen, to be with them, and then carry back, rejoin what it is you're doing.
I love that so much, Tammah. For years, I did anti-sexual violence work, and I've always worked from this very spot in my home office. And I have a window that looks out into a crabapple tree. And there were so many things, especially as we transitioned, so many of us, to remote work during the beginning of the pandemic, where we started having to remind people to look away from your computer occasionally, right? To like focus your eyes if you are someone who uses your eyes to work with a screen, especially. And one of the things that I was able to share with others was my already constant practice of noticing the birds. They're called bird breaks in our household, constant bird breaks. And folks just grew to know that if my gaze drifted away, and Tammah, earlier I saw you and it looked like you were looking out a window, I was like, she's got a bird she's looking at. I know this look. And for me, I have this look regularly, and people will see me look out, and what I'm noticing is often a bird that is visiting, that is giving me that opportunity to pay attention to it instead of a screen for a moment. And to do the same with bird song. I often now will just when the windows are open, pause, because I'll be like, oh, I don't know that bird. Who is it? And I grab my Merlin app and I try to figure it out. Or I hear, oh, the cedar waxwings are here. I got to take a break and go look for them. Where are they in my yard? So there's a way in which that willingness to gift ourselves that time. I really love your invitation to change the terminology around that. That willingness to gift ourselves that time benefits our mental health, it benefits our physical health, and it introduces the people around us to the very same concept of like, everybody deserves breaks. Everybody deserves to gift themselves the break of being in nature, right? Absolutely. I'm curious, you all, when we're thinking about this, we've talked a lot about accessibility. We've talked about so many different pieces of this. And I want to name that, part of what Birdability exists for is to help make physical access possible, but also to build community, which is sort of our next chunk of conversation that I would love for us to have. And I know for myself, again, what I needed to be able to bird changed quite radically when I was diagnosed with PTSD and was introduced to birding. That was one thing. And then when my body didn't work in the same way anymore, and I needed to change how I accessed birds, I needed something different. I needed places that had sit spots. I needed benches along paths. I needed paths that were not riddled with roots and potholes and things like that. And so I know for me, part of what Birdability has been too is this honoring and acknowledging that we all deserve access to nature in these ways, and that sometimes we have to do some advocacy and education about how our public lands and the spaces that we deserve access to can be more inclusive and more welcoming. And Anne Marie, I'm wondering if you'd like to share any of what makes birding accessible to you and how that has played into your mental health.
Of course, it's different for everybody, just like you said. What one person needs, the other one might not, and vice versa. For me, a wheelchair user, wheelchair accessibility is obviously of high priority, and that usually means a very hard-packed trail. It could be macadam, it could be hard-packed dirt or stones, and relatively flat. Now, since I have a power wheelchair, being flat is not quite as critical for me, but for somebody who's using a manual wheelchair, that could make or break the deal. So, and of course, if you're on slant, you want edges to the path so that you're not going to go rolling off, or something like that. So you feel secure and, safe, that you can wander around, whatever. So definitely wheelchair accessibility, and that, of course, involves a wheelchair accessible bathroom and whatever. And if there's a wall on the side, there has to be a space for your eyes to look through so you can see. I remember one time, I forget, I had a bird guide take me, and it was somewhere, I want to say in Idaho, and we were watching a bunch of birds, and we came to this, like, I guess you call it a bird blind, yeah. And he was pointing out all these birds to me, and I'm like, I don't see a thing. And we looked at each other, and we realized that, whatever. So to make a long story short, like 6 months later, that guy emailed me and said, hey, I talked to the people about that bird blind, and he sent me a picture of the bird blind with a nice spot of maybe 5 inches where somebody at different heights could see. I'm a short person, so I need something down low, like for a toddler, whereas other people, might be of average stature and need a higher spot. So it's not a perfect science, because there's no way it's going to be good for everybody. And then you get into the sensory disabilities and the visual and hearing, and that's a whole different ballgame, which I can't really speak about as an expert. So, it's maintaining an openness to the different types of disabilities you can have. And that's not easy, because we all tend to focus on where we're at and our experiences in our life. So, but it works. Definitely having a wheelchair accessible place for me means all the thing in the world. So,
I love that.
Yeah.
That community, right? Like what you were talking about, the willingness to hear from others about what they need is part of
Right,
being in deep
exactly.
community.
Yeah.
It's part of acknowledging the unique needs that each of us brings, whether we have disabilities or whether our access needs are not about disability or chronic health concerns. And I think that is such an important thing to remember, that there is no one thing that's accessible to everyone. We use that as shorthand, right? But in reality, that's part of why the Birdability map doesn't say this site is accessible or this site is not accessible. Instead, it says, here are all of the access features. And now you, Anne Marie, or you, Tammah, or you, Kat, or you, Holly, or you, Sheridan, decide, is this accessible for me based on what I need?
Right. And you have to advocate for yourself, too, because, and at the same time you advocate for yourself, you have to remember that people are different. What the handicap accessible toilet for somebody else might be way too high for me. I've had that happen where they say, oh, it's perfectly accessible, it's wonderful. And they go in there and it's like, well, I'm not climbing an elephant, you know, so it's different. You just have to be open-minded.
I so appreciate that. And the ways that we can acknowledge that being in community and learning from each other helps us see the places where we have not understood others' access needs, right? Like, I think that that's part of what Birdability has been for me, is an opportunity to hear from so many different folks. I'm curious, for the rest of you, birding often does bring people together, right? Like, that is one of the things we've been talking about so much. So how have you experienced or facilitated a sense of community in the birding world? And how does that community aspect contribute to mental health? Holly or Sheridan, I think we're going to get us started. And I'm just really curious about how that has shown up for you all. I like you both. I like, who's
Right. I was like, how do you want to go? Yeah, I think it's very influential in building the community, but I also think that in part, the belonging is when people actually use the community that was built or that they have built for themselves. I think a lot of the questions that I've either heard or been asked personally is, how do we get more birders in this certain different demographic to come out to the, an event or something of the sort? And my answer is always, well, first you have to go ask them, whatever demographic that is, ask them what their barriers are or what their needs are, and actually do the work to accommodate those needs to the best of their ability, so that there is a sense of belonging that is built there. And in my own experience, I would say how I use the community that I have built. I have birder friends in multiple states, people I've never met before, but I would consider them friends. I went on a family trip to Arizona. I had never been to Arizona before. And so I used, well, it's not called Twitter anymore, but I used my social media, quote unquote, bird family. And I just asked, does anybody want to go birding with me in Arizona? I'll be here these days. And yeah, and somebody volunteered and they were like, I'd love to go with you. So, that creates that sense of it really is a community and you can use it and it's safe. And, of course, taking into account safety, just personal safety, but actually using that community and getting out and meeting new people, seeing where they are, the things that they know. And so I did it once and I'll do it again the next time. So yeah, I think that's how you build that belonging.
I love that, Sheridan. That's great. And it shows that we can all do this, right? We can all feel empowered. Birds empower people in very special ways. And they are our common ground. They are a common language. So we could be coming from different backgrounds. We might even speak different languages, but we all speak the language of bird. And so I see birds as community builders, like you said. They bring people together. We are all on this call today because of these magnificent creatures, right? And that's really something special that I think sets them apart from other forms of wildlife. And so thinking about community and birds naturally bringing people together, this U.S. Surgeon General has stated that we are living in an era of an epidemic of social isolation and loneliness here in the United States anyway. And I do believe this is also a global phenomenon. The point is that birds allow us to cut the edge off of some of those feelings of loneliness. And they also allow us to connect with other people because there are communities of bird lovers out there, and we can find them either if we find, we might have physical birding clubs or special bird outings or affinity groups devoted to birds in our regions, or if we're not in an accessible area to finding groups of people to join and belong with, we can find those online here with Birdability too. So that's really important. And for me personally, it's been really kind of vital for me to find like-minded people who appreciate the style of mindful birding, accessing birds for part of our wellness to cultivate that kind of sense of well-being and also joy. And so I was meeting a lot of people who shared the same philosophies, practiced in the same birding style, because I see it as sort of a style of birding. There are many different styles of birding out there. And I ended up bringing everybody together for some calls over Zoom. And this has resulted in something called the Mindful Birding Network, which is a community of people who are interested in elevating this style of birding by sharing with each other, by inspiring each other, and by sharing resources. And so I think that this goes like hand in hand with what Sheridan says. If you see an area that you could help by building a community, go for it. You know, you never know what might come about. You might meet some of the best friends you'll ever have, whether that be feathered best friends or they're other people. So that's one of the joys. And so I just hope everybody is able to find their community. Birds bring us together. So.
And I will remind folks, maybe Holly, you could drop Mindful Birding Network information into the chat. Like, one of the things that we hope that this week, Birdability Week, does is build stronger community and connections between folks. And you know, I want to acknowledge it's already 14 minutes to the hour. How does this happen? It is such a, oh, thanks, Lindsay, for dropping that into the chat. It is one of the things that happens every time, which is I am so ambitious in all the things I think we're going to get to talk about, because I am so hungry to hear from other folks about how they're experiencing these things. And we don't have time for all of our questions. So I think the place that we, exactly, Gary, it could be 6 hours and it wouldn't be long enough. Thank you. I agree. One of the things that I would love to do is to sort of ask each of you for any closing thoughts, sort of reflections, things you meant to talk about and haven't gotten to, thoughts about how birding and mental health are so vitally connected, how nature and mental health are so vitally connected. And as we do that, then we'll move to some of our checkout exercises and closing statements and prize drawings, because we love prize drawings and we have a bunch of cool things to be able to share with you all. So maybe in the next like 3 or so minutes, 3 to 5 minutes, if y'all could just wrap us up. What are the things that you want to leave this group with?
I mean, I think everybody has said a lot of good stuff, and people need to realize you don't need to make it complicated. You don't need to buy a $3,000 pair of binoculars and, you know, camera and all that. Just open your eyes, look out the window. It can be simple. Just see, you know, or listen, whatever you happen to, you know, do. It just really, it's really, the mindfulness is very healing. It really is.
I'd like to say that mental health is health and health is mental health, and that spending time with birds, any way that you do it, is birding. There's no qualifiers, as we've heard already. Just so you're connecting with birds through all the different ways. You're a birder, if you want to call yourself that or not, and that's fine too. But they are a great part of our healing journey for health and mental health. Research has supported that spending time with birds, listening to bird song, reduces the levels of depression, anxiety, and also reduces the sense of isolation, even if you're by yourself. And so 2 hours, 7 days, over the course of 7 days, doesn't have to be all at once, has shown to also reduce those same symptoms of stress, anxiety, and depression and paranoia. So again, gift yourself these tools that are accessible for us all in the ways that we can with the birds.
Whoops, Holly or
Um,
Sheridan? Yeah, Sheridan.
I think my closing remarks would just be a personal thing that I also have to remember for myself, is to not overthink the activity. So if it is something that you're already passionate about or marginally passionate about, just if you have the thought that day that, I would like to see some birds today, and don't think past that. Just, figure out how that is going to look for you that day, and then do it. And so I think just being intentional about, like you said, you don't need equipment, you don't need to go anywhere. I've even during the pandemic, the way that I learned bird calls was watching and listening to YouTube videos, and I would just search northeast, or no, I would search southeast backyard birds, and then I would just listen to the birds, and that's how I learned calls without leaving, my house. So yeah, if you seek out the birds, they will be there for sure. So
Holly, any last?
Yeah, so I just want to advocate again for the accessing birds and bringing birds into our lives as part of our self-care, and thinking about, it's kind of a really stressful time for a lot of reasons in this world right now. And being intentional to take that time that everybody here, I'm just going to echo that again, because again, I don't think we can hear it enough. That is important. You deserve it to take that time. We're going also in the Northern Hemisphere into a transitional seasonal period where I love that Sheridan talked about birdsong, because we didn't touch as much on this one, but thinking about that, where birds aren't singing as much as on territory. So we might not be hearing a lot of birdsong when we step outside in winter months, but perhaps we can invite them indoors, like Sheridan suggested, and being intentional by playing some birdsong in your background. And you can find soundtracks that include just a variety of birdsong on Spotify, on YouTube, any number of places. And this is important, and also has shown to improve our feelings of mental well-being and reduce anxiety. And so these are some tips to help get us through these next couple of months, which are, notably more difficult for people suffering from seasonal affective disorder, things like that. So just bringing birds in. So invite them in, enjoy them, and happy birding, everyone.
I love that so much. There is no lack of possibility around how you bird. And I think that's one of the joys of birds and mental health. And I just want to name that being out in nature, experiencing nature from in your own home, virtual birding, feeder cams, bird song, all of that, all of those things are ways that we can prioritize our own mental health and well-being in this. And I just want to thank you all so much. I'm going to cut mine short. I would love, Tammah, still for us to get to do an activity if you're interested in doing that for a minute or two. Then we'll ask Hannah to sort of wrap us up, and I will share who won what, because we've got books from Tammah and Holly to give away, as well as prizes from our sponsors. So Tammah, are you still feeling like it's a good use of our time here together to do an exercise?
Sure. I am an intuitive, so I was just talking with Holly earlier about I was going to allow our space and time together help guide the exercise. And so what comes up for me is something that I adapted. I don't know, some may not know. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. So one of the best practices for reducing anxiety, which can also include stress, is the 5-4-3-2-1 practice. Like I didn't make that up, so I can't. But what I have adapted it to is to modify it and apply it to birds. So I just want to invite, if you don't have to move, but just to look if you have a window nearby, and if not, to listen. But I want to invite you just to breathe in, just to get comfortable comfortable if you're lying down or however you are in your body, just to get comfortable. And to take a deep breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. And you can relax and just rest your eyes or close them as we do this. Breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. We've had the opportunity to talk about our self-care and how birds can show up in our lives and do show up in our lives in all the ways that they do, and can remind us that we do as well. And that they're a part of our lives, our health, our mental health. So I want to invite you now to think about a bird. Maybe it's the hummingbird that you met earlier with Holly as we opened today, or it's another bird that comes forward for you. And what are 5 things that you see in your bird? What color are the feathers? What is the shape of the beak? What color are the legs? The eye? What are 4 things that you can hear? Perhaps it's what you're imagining of the bird, or perhaps it's in your space right where you are. And what are 3 things that you can feel? Perhaps it's the chair you're in, the comforter that you're lying on, the wood of a table, a soft breeze, sunlight, or cold. 3 things you feel. And what are 2 things that you smell? I invite you to consider that as you smell and notice, so too the bird, which reminds us that we share habitats and spaces with birds. They may smell differently than we do, and that's okay. What do you smell? And what is one thing that you taste? Perhaps it's a beverage you've sipped, the saltiness on your tongue, but perhaps you don't taste anything. I just want to again invite you to breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth slowly, and offer a gratitude. What is something you're grateful for? As we talked about, gratitude is part of self-acceptance, acceptance of what is. In these times with highs and lows, being able to notice and to slow down and to pause allows for the gratitude to come forward. And when you're ready, just gently open your eyes if they've been closed, or return to the space. It's been an honor to be here. Thank you.
My gratitude is to you, Tammah, and Anne-Marie, and Sheridan, and Holly for joining us today for this conversation. I have been dreaming of this since the minute I started at Birdability almost. And I'm so grateful for this time together and this important conversation. And Hannah, I'm wondering if you would like to offer us some closing thoughts as we end our time together. Hannah Sawyer from the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation.
Yes, thank you so much, Kat, and truly everyone who's on this panel. This has been so lovely. My name is Hannah Sawyer. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a white woman with a brown ponytail that you can't really see because my background is blurred, and I'm wearing a blue sweatshirt. And yeah, and I'm living with a form of paralysis. I'm a wheelchair user, and I also have anxiety and depression. And I have found nature my entire life to be such a huge refuge and solace. And to me, being in nature and finding ways to be connected to nature is the exact opposite of isolation, which I think so many disabled folks and people of many different marginalized identities find themselves in places of isolation. And nature to me is the exact opposite of that, because it, you know, allows us to understand, as all of you have mentioned so beautifully, that we are connected to the life and non-life forms around us, which to me is why it's so interconnected with disability, because we know from the disabled experience that interdependence is, you know, really what keeps the world turning and what keeps us breathing and living. And yeah, I just, you know, would also like to close with the truth and idea and knowledge that nature and disability are not in any way at odds with each other. I think we have heard so many beautiful stories today of how really they're able to work hand in hand. And I think that, you know, they're not at odds with each other because our bodies and our body minds are not at odds with nature. And I think that's really important to understand and to see. So I really appreciate all of you taking the time to do this, and yeah, thank you again all so much.
Thank you, Hannah, for reminding us that we are perfect exactly as we are, and that there is not a divide between nature and disability, and that nature is part of disability and disability is part of nature. And access to nature is part of what is each of our birthrights, that access to well-being that comes with nature. I am going to stop our recording now and say thank you to everyone again for being here. We're so delighted to have had the chance for this conversation. We'll be sharing more about mental health and birding in the coming year, and we look forward to inviting you into those spaces and conversations as well. And I hope everyone has a terrific rest of Birdability Week. I'm going to stop the recording, and then we're going to do prizes.